This is the Radiance Empress of Light, and this is Infernum's version. This video will showcase the absolute limit of this boss by ranking every modded Empress of Light. First, starting off with Fargos Eternity. This fight is extremely challenging, with various reworked attacks such as the Ethereal Lance summoning an insane amount of projectiles, an absolute gargantuan sun dance, and large dash attacks which are followed by prismatic bolts. Overall, there's a lot of variety of attack patterns, and this gets even crazier in phase 2, with some really satisfying dodge attacks like this spinning move. Difficulty wise, similar to other Eternity mode bosses, you're obviously not going to have a good time. Managing your wing/flight time is important, as you don't want to be caught midair in a barrage of ethereal lances. With that being said, however, in my personal opinion, this is one of the relatively easier Eternity mode bosses, unlike some other ones. Brain of Cthulhu. The Betsy's heart accessory is so good for dashing through the Empress's projectiles without taking damage, and the sparkling adoration allows for projectile grazing. Amazing for bullet hell bosses like the Empress. I also really like the sprite for this boss. It's sort of demonic, which really fits with the Eternity mode theme of suffering. All in all, a pretty solid Empress rework, and will go in the A tier. Next on the list is the Radiance Empress, and boy, is this probably the most difficult Empress on the list, maybe even in modern Terraria. I'll be showing you the true form post-Moonlord version, which is achieved once you defeat Nighttime Empress and obtain the Crystal Bell. Now, why is this boss so difficult? Well, just let me show you. Vanilla Empress Sundance, Radiance Sundance. Vanilla Empress Prismatic Bolts, Radiance Prismatic Bolts. Vanilla Everlasting Rainbow, Radiance's Everlasting Rainbow. You get the idea. It is absolutely insane. And just remember, it's Daytime Empress, so on top of the crazy projectile spam, you also have to no-hit the boss. The Radiant Charm is essentially mandatory to buff your character and be even fast enough to dodge the projectiles and from the gravitational pull of the Sundance attack, which by the way will one-shot you even in God mode. I have no clue how that works, but that doesn't seem balanced. Now, moving away from gameplay, what about thematics? Whereas the background is just a black void, I personally like it. It emphasizes the Empress of Light fantasy, having bright light attacks, light speed movement, and expanding on the vanilla lore of cleansing all impurity. This boss is extremely difficult, maybe even too difficult. However, this is the way the mod is intended, so I can't fault it too much. The attacks feel really satisfying to dodge, and I love the visuals as well. It really sells the Radiance theme, and I would assume with a nice godly soundtrack would make it something really special. With that being said, I'm putting this in the S tier. For the next Empress, it comes from Tetris boss fight, filled with some pretty visually cool boss fights. However, I can't say much about the Queen of Night, intended to be challenged after the vanilla Empress. Now, if Radiance Empress was difficult, this is probably the exact opposite. Even with the God Curse rune enabled, the Queen of Night attacks are pretty weak, dealing anywhere between 40 to 70 damage. This doesn't mean that the boss is inherently bad. It still has some pretty cool attack patterns, such as the follow the arrow type move, which punishes you for inputting the wrong key. The attacks also require some extreme precision, which spawns multiple Empresses, while prismatic bolts fly across the screen. So even if the attacks are somewhat weak, this boss would be difficult to no-hit. And with all of that being said, for me, the boss is a B tier. Now let's talk about Calamity Mod's Infernum Empress. Whereas Infernum is a massive challenge mode for Calamity, expanding on boss AIs similar to Fargos Eternity mode, this isn't as difficult in comparison. Obviously, it's not a bad thing, but just preference. The fight itself is pretty fast paced, and from the moment you summon her, it's go time. Contrast this with Radiance, for example, where precision dodging is extremely important. However, for Infernum, I felt like I had to keep on moving, and there was never really a moment of stillness. I really enjoyed this style and the balance between both mediums. Similar to other Infernum bosses, I love how they use the boss drops as attacks, such as the Terra Prisma lasers. The Infernum shaders also drastically upgrade the visuals of this boss, though I have to say some of the attacks can be quite laggy, such as this downward ethereal lance move. The reworked Empress also introduces a new desperation attack, summoning a giant moon, followed by various cosmic projectiles, and in Infernum fashion, a big Moonlord laser, because why not? Overall, this is quite a challenging boss on its own, and definitely deserves next to be Fargos at A tier. And now, saving the best for last, I'm sure many of you saw this coming. The MEAC Demo Empress of Light probably has the greatest visual effects ever. Almost every attack of this boss can basically be turned into its own thumbnail. Like seriously, just absolute insanity. With the showstopper being this Radiant Beam move that creates an explosion of light followed by ethereal lances. Other attacks include this building up of a sun explosion that requires the player to dodge the prismatic bolts, lasers, and light slashes. And just take a look at this reworked sun dance move that requires you to run in a circle to avoid taking damage. And one thing I can't show in this video is how amazing the soundtrack is. And just a little side tangent, the recent comments on this video are just too funny to read. Anyways, not only does it sync so perfectly with the Empress's attacks, but the build up and climax adds so much to the thematic of the Empress fight and makes this boss an easy S tier. So what are your thoughts on this list? Subscribe and goodbye.